And we are live Friday, 4 p.m, day 35 on lockdown. Welcome, Steve, Michael, and Dennis. It's a co-brand today. Awesomers.com versus Seller Sessions. We're talking 0 to 50 million. I brought in an expert panel to chat about this. Steve and I will co-host on this one. But first things first, Steve, do you want to start the conversation in terms of who you are, for those who don't know, and then we'll move on to Michael, then Dennis.
Sounds good. Yeah. Hey, everybody. It is me. It's Steve Simonson, and we are happy to be doing another Dualcast with Seller Sessions. It's going to be a great one. And I'm an old e-commerce guy. I've been in business for 30 years, online for over 20 years, and we've learned a few lessons along the way. Go ahead, Michael. What about you?
A little older than you, so a little more experience. Not as much in e-commerce, but you and I started working together in about 2000, so we've known each other for 20 years now. And I've been at several other e-commerce companies also. I built my first e-commerce website in '98. So a little bit of experience and lots of bruises. I hope I can share some lessons, save some people some trouble.
Sounds good. And Dennis?
Yeah, kind of started selling online right around 2000 and kind of graduated to owning my own business in about 2016 and have been doing that ever since, but mostly with a few startups. So kind of getting the ropes the hard way a few times.
Excellent. Juan says, hello, Masters. Floren's back from Australia. Morning, boys. Convinced my buddy Mike to stay up today to listen to you. Catch up soon. Michael's in the feed. Juan's in the feed. We'll get a few more join us in a moment. So, Steve, do you want to set the scene for us?
Yeah. So, listen, our topic today, Danny and I talked about this, a week or so ago. We want to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned collectively as a group about bringing on teams, right? I think everybody has experience with trying to hire somebody. It doesn't go great. Maybe you hire somebody else and it goes great. They leave. There's all kinds of variations of these stories. But the folks on here have been on the journey from 0 to $50 million in revenue and beyond, by the way. Pinkowski was with a company that went from 50 to past 100 million. And some of my companies have been right up against that 100 million plus mark along the way and sometimes beyond. So, and these guys were pivotal, Michael and Dennis in particular, in those journeys. So we're going to talk about, how we started, how it was scrappy, how we had to do everything ourselves. And then when we brought on people, what are some of the challenges and lessons learned, and maybe some of the ways to make it easier along the way. So that's the idea, Danny.
Cool. Great. So let's start from 0 then. Who's going first?
Oh, boy. Yeah. So I'll start at 0 because it was just me. Yeah. In the very beginning, it was just me. And then we would bring on 1 or 2 people. Dennis was probably number 2 at one of our original startups, where he would handle basically everything else. I had the ideas, and as my management style is I throw a grenade in and they jump on it and figure out how to put it out. So, when we would hire people initially, we were just trying to figure out how to put out bombs. Dennis, do you remember when we were just you and Kathy and then Jessica and so on?
I do. I remember very clearly our first order actually was a fraudulent order going to Africa. So the lesson started early.
Yeah. And so from there, once we got started, we had a challenge of scaling. So there was a time where we were doing $1 million, and that was fine with just kind of the hodgepodge of people and really no policy, no real systems. But we were very early on committed to systems. And then we started probably 3-4 years in trying to build a scalable operation in the Philippines. And Michael, why don't you tell them our scheme on how we, once we decided to go to the Philippines, what we did about it?
Well, so we had a guy that went over, and we kind of researched some different ideas and looked at different countries and different possibilities. And we started with the Philippines because we felt like we had some connection there through family and things. And that was good. So then we rented some space and we interviewed some people. And I think the first team was maybe about 6. Remember, guys? I think, there was
maybe 8
a handful. Yeah. And we thought we were into a good thing. We rented some office space and all, and then we found out that they turned off the air conditioning at night. which was a problem because we worked at night because that was the American day with the time change. So it was just hot and sweltering and all that. But it was clearly working, and then we started adding more people. And as a part of this, the focus of this webinar today, we kept looking for ways to kind of get things better. And one of the things we discovered was we had all these computers that sat there during the Filipino day, and there was nothing going on. And so we started to hire people that could do some bookkeeping for us, and we hired people that could do some graphics for us. So when we were really humming, we had people, all the desks were filled all night long in a kind of a call center configuration. And then at about 8 o'clock in the morning, Manila time, those people were all started leaving, and we had a new team coming in of, again, graphic artists and a little bit of code and a bunch of payables and stuff like that. And we reused that space, again, because we wanted to systematize this thing and make it work for scale. And, you don't have to buy as many computers. You don't have to buy any more office space. We just made use of what we had.
So, Danny, one of the lessons that, I take away from that is that, we just had to do it. We literally sent somebody over on a plane. He didn't have any idea what to do. He didn't know any people. He didn't know any offices. He didn't know anything. He just got off the plane and went a certain direction. And so that's part of the point is you got to take that leap first to make a hire, to make a move. Yeah. Next part of the lesson is try to think about the future, right? We did not know that they turned off the air conditioning at night after signing a lease, by the way. So we're in the building. We're signed a lease that says nothing about air conditioning during the day or during our day, which was nighttime. And they're like, yeah, well, thanks for your comments. We're still turning off the air conditioning. Thank you. And I think we eventually worked something out. And not long after that lease was over, we were in another building for sure. So don't be afraid to act, but do whatever risk mitigation you can. And then, of course, maximize the resource. In today's world, we use VAs. I suppose most people are working from home, so we don't have that office space burden, which is good. But boy, oh boy, be as efficient as you can.
Yeah. And how long did that run for over that period? So from setting it up beginning to end, and did you build off the back of that, or did you completely move on?
No, that operation went from those first 8 or so people. That was batch one. Each one became batches. You guys remember that? And then it was kind of like a little honorific inside the organization. They go, oh, I'm batch 7, I'm batch 8. Yeah. And it was usually 8 to 10 per batch. And at one point we were up around 100 full-time people that rotated amongst those 24-hour shifts. And this was a fairly large company. And
how does that change in terms of, what they say in the startup, managing 1 to 10 is a lot easier. It's friendly. There's camaraderie there. You end up splitting jobs and crossing over and going out for pizza, etc. How has that changed from 10 to 50 to 50 to 100?
Oh, there were tons of changes.
Yeah, wildly. First of all, I'm a terrible manager. Entrepreneurs in general are not great managers. Yeah. We think that everybody else thinks like us. This is a great weakness, by the way, and I'm owning it. But we think that, well, just because I will work all night to solve this problem, first of all, I see the problem. Secondly, I'll do whatever it takes to solve that problem. That's not the same way that somebody else downstream is going to view that. No. So you have to create an environment that makes problem solving something that it's easier for them to solve the problems than it is to exist with the problems. Yeah. And that's a big deal. Our mentality is different. I don't know if anybody has any comments about that, but we look at things differently than kind of a line person, downstream.
So do you want to give some examples of what it looked like at 20 to 50, then into 100 from Michael or Dennis's perspective?
Yeah, so we started adding these batches, and then we had to. That forced us to start to systematize some training and all. And that was a place where it fit really well into the Filipino culture because there was a real desire to learn and a desire to, get all of the specifics down. What we missed in that, and there's the Filipinos have a long-standing tradition of service.
Very honorable. They want to do their best for you,
And they love to help. What we missed in all that was that a lot of their education was rooted in sort of memorization and not necessarily in problem solving. So they probably knew their times tables, further than I did, but they didn't necessarily understand the mechanics of what was happening there. So when we got into situations where they were in a customer service relationship, they sort of wanted to know what was the answer. They kept saying, what do I tell them for this? And then they would scribble down this answer. And we were trying to say, well, we can't anticipate what every customer is going to ask. We don't want to. We want you to understand it and then communicate that we are a solution provider and that we're there to help and all that. So we struggled with that. And at one point, we had to kind of scale back. We had to say, out of this big group, there's about a third of them that get it. Yeah. And 2/3 that just don't. And so we ended up scaling back. And to help that, Dennis was already traveling a bunch. Steve, of course, travels a ton. But I had to get out of my comfort zone. And I went over to Manila every month for 6 months. I'd go over for a week or more. And just I wanted to be there with them and talking to them and work on this problem solving thing. And out of that, they really put together this culture that said, we get it. And they started to reinforce, and then they started, then your people are your best source of referrals, right? So we started getting the right kind of people in from that. Our HR team started to say, oh, okay, now we understand. You don't really want the person necessarily from the best school with the best grades. You want somebody that thinks this way. Yeah. And so we started, getting cleaned up there. And that was the cycle that we got into that worked so well.
And I'm going to say this in the kindest way, and I think it more comes from want to be at service, I think, and terrified of making mistakes. Sometimes with Filipinos, it's hard for them to get them to think completely independently because they're concerned about service and saying and doing the right thing. Therefore, they revert back to type of not doing it. So sometimes you have to coax it out of them. And
I totally agree.
But that's normally that one-on-one man or female management to do that. It's quite difficult because it can take time to literally saying to them, look, you can do whatever you want and I will back your mistake. But sometimes it doesn't go in and you really have to kind of feed that. I mean, I say to members of my team, I sit them down and I'm going, today I'm going to grow you. I'm going to tell you this stuff. You're doing work for this person over there. They're taking liberties. I'll pay you 3 times the amount of money. You've got to stop doing that work for them. Have some self-respect, and have those kind of conversation. But that takes a while to build that trust when they know your interest, their best interest is for them. Do you know what I mean? But even still within is that it's hard to scale that. So when you said there's a proportion that did get it, what did you do about the guys that didn't get it?
Candidly, Steve gives me permission here to tell the story.
Yeah.
So we got to a tough spot, and I remember being in the offices in Seattle, and I went to Steve and I said, "This thing it's going to melt down. It's not going to work."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Right? So Steve likes to empower people. So I said, "Well, here's my plan." I said, "I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to go over and I'm going to talk to him." And what we did was we said, "Hey, there's a cultural difference here, and it's not your fault." I made a big deal about this. Yeah. We were an American company, but we came into a Filipino city. We walked down a Manila street into a Manila office building to people that were hired, by Manila people, and it's not your fault. But we have this job to do, and it has to get done this way.
Yeah.
And so Steve was kind enough to let us work out a generous plan to let them leave, and then. Like I said, about 2/3 of them accepted that offer. I didn't fire anybody. I just made it clear that we were going to be going this way, and this is how we were going to measure performance and success. And then I got the other third together, and we went out to a place where we could all just relax a little bit. And I said, "Okay, you're in. Now let's talk about what's going forward."
And so, how did you manage to get that third to implement that mindset on the new members? Is that where you've got them to hire their friends and people that they know that contain the right mindset?
Yeah. And I went over once a month for a week. I just said, and again, Steve was, we were able to afford to do that and to travel like that. But I thought just being there, and I want to come back to your point, because this is really important. You can tell them something, but when they see you do it, right? When you're standing over somebody's shoulder in a cubicle and they screw up and their batchmate is sitting next to them and they see you say, "Hey, that's all right. That was a good effort. I see what you're trying to do, but next time let's do it this way." And they see that there's no terrible repercussions. They see that you're generally coaching, not, bossing or torturing or something. Boy, that makes a big difference.
So one thing I want to jump in and say is that this is not specific to the Philippines. This is a general Asian cultural thing, right? They don't want to make a mistake, so they tread lightly. And ultimately, we paid people to quit. We're like, if you're not in, here's some money, go away. Because there are cultural things that they have in the Philippines in particular. They call it the crab mentality. As people grow and get promoted, somebody else is trying to pull them down. And that's not the kind of person you want in your organization. But when you hire quickly, it's hard to deal with. So over time, we learned you got to put in systems. You got to put in, all the SOPs. You got to put in all this stuff to help them and empower them. But you got to also take out the people who really are not committed. And that was we didn't do a good job of hiring. So Dennis had a case where he was running a department that literally every department were like, we want metrics. And he's like, hey, this is the claims department. How am I supposed to get metrics? Sales is easy. Marketing is easy. You're spending money on ads. Sales is making bank. There's other things that are easy to do. How are you going to do claims? There's no money that is transacting, or at least it was harder. And, Dennis ended up having, more or less 60 people under him between sales, fulfillment, and claims. But maybe Dennis talking about how he had to build that out would be useful as well, by the way.
Yeah. So, to kind of hop on the back of what Mike was already building a little bit, we faced just a number of different unexpected issues. And as we began to systemize some of these behaviors that we did not want to see, and some of the behaviors that we did want to see, that really started to help us sort out who was all in and who needed to be on the way out. And that was honestly the critical first steps, right? When you're first over there, you hire your first 8 people, you don't have a lot of policies in place. You don't have a lot of, what are you going to do when somebody shows up late and they're supposed to be logged in the phone, 10 minutes before shift, but instead it's 10 minutes after shift, and how that impacts the teammates and so forth. So that also created a lot of interplay that was not positive as well. So as we began to roll out systems to help guide our people properly, that made a big impact. And believe it or not, the ability to measure how well they were performing their individual jobs, like claims, like sales and fulfillment, became a big play as well. Because at this point, when you can actually sit down and you can talk about how many claim interactions per day you're doing, and whether or not you're hitting the above average or below average based on what claim type you're doing, and then what kind of performance reviews you're getting. All of a sudden, you have a different kind of credibility. And if your batchmate's sitting next to you doing something else and having different numbers, you can quantify that and say, this guy is doing the same job as me, or he's not necessarily doing the same job. And then you're, when you have a performance review with them, it sounds completely different, right? Where I can sit down and I can speak with them about their performance versus the field, and the satisfaction, with their coworkers and so forth. And I can't describe for you how powerful that is when you actually need to go in and you're discussing the future of somebody's, paycheck, when you can actually sit down and talk with them candidly. Sometimes I can be, it can feel a little bit mean, but I tell you what, sometimes when you have to deliver a tough message to somebody, that's the guy that can turn around and then become an all-star for you, because they have this choice then, right? Like, do I want to go ahead and confront these metrics head on and try and solve the issues that they're bringing to the table? Or do I want to find an easier job where this kind of scrutiny is not something that I'm going to have to deal with?
Yeah. So would you say that, and I mean this in the politest way, would you say that reading between the lines is that there is quite heavy on metrics? So like Steve, me and you, entrepreneurs, we probably want someone to be going, oh yeah, you've written 4 emails today that claim to... watching over your shoulder, was it a bit, did it feel like a bit like that? Is this what you're saying about delivering the message, or?
Not exactly. I'll just help from my memory. So one of the things, and by the way, this is current stuff too. We still do this today.
Gotcha.
The system itself aggregates objective measurements.
Right.
So again, entrepreneurs think, KPIs are good for me so I can tell if you suck, but that's not actually what they're for. KPIs are to say, is the system working? Right? And it's just like a car engine. You've got your RPMs. Are they within the right range? If they are, fine. Everybody just keep going. If they're not, too low, too high, why is that? And the people, as Dennis said, they love to have an objective measurement. There's no subjectivity in my manager's mean. He said, I'm not doing a good job, but I don't know why. It's like, no, I'm below this line. We've all agreed this line is feasible. Everybody else is achieving this line. Why am I not achieving the line? And then it's a coaching about behavior, about whatever, to make those things happen. So KPIs are not for entrepreneurs. They are for the people, and people love to have objective measurements.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, so we've zoomed right in. Should we zoom out a little bit now? So we've got right into KPIs. We've got to the measurement. I don't know where you were with how many on the team, whether that's 50 to 100. Where did it go from there? Obviously, you've set up in the Philippines. You've dealt with it culturally. You've had to adjust the team, adjust the mindset, bring in KPIs. Where do we go from there?
Well, remember that we also had a reasonable sized team in the U.S., and there was a lot of balancing between who's responsible for what and how these things would be managed. One of the things that I recall is, as the teams would grow, the stateside team, which was, we had a bunch of different locations at one point or another, but, there's probably 50 or 100 people in the U.S. as well. There was some sloppiness in who was responsible, right? Because the U.S. would go, hey, let the Philippines do this, and I'll just manage them. And then the Philippines would be stuck with things that were not clear, or they didn't have clear directives. So there were some conflicts between trying to figure out who owned what. And ultimately, we had to really have a functional organizational chart to help solve those things. And I recommend for everybody to understand every function of your business, from kind of product development, through merchandising, getting the product details, marketing, sales, et cetera, all the way down through, finance, where you count the money. Without that functional org chart, I think we struggled a lot. And I remember them beating on me for an org chart. Like, I have the magic answer. I hate it doing org charts. I don't like org charts. Now I know how to do them, so it's easier, but it was hard.
Did you hate org charts because you didn't know how to do them, or what? You didn't feel you were good at them, or you just didn't like them because you're an entrepreneur and it's too safe, too organized?
Some of it is all of the above, but really I didn't know how to do it. Right, I'd never been in a big company myself. I always worked on my own. Right, since I was 18, I owned my own business. So my org chart experience is me cleaning toilets at 18 as my first janitorial company, right? Yeah. I'm an organization of one. So there's not a point of reference. So I had no experience. Secondly, I didn't understand how a piece of paper could have any benefit. It's like, no, we need to do stuff. Paper's not relevant to me. So I didn't get how it actually could be helpful. And I guarantee you, as people heard me say, get a functional org chart, they have those same exact thoughts. They're like, how can a piece of paper help anything? But ultimately, when you have management and tiers of management, it really is essential to assign responsibility and accountability. And once I kind of understood that, then it was easier to get done. But everybody was kind of looking at me to do it, and I just didn't know how to do it. And it was also complex. I just didn't get it with so many pieces. So it took me a long time to figure it out and to work with the team.
And is that as well? Because
So the key phrase in Steve's thing there is the functional org chart. Because when most people do org charts, they sit there and say, okay, I got 8 people in my company, so I'm going to need 8 boxes, and how do I kind of push them around? Yeah. And the reality is, you look at your company and the functions that happen, and you've got 50 functions, right? Yeah. And you still have only 8 people. So then you go and you put somebody's name into a bunch of boxes over and over and over again. And, when we would build these things, Dennis would have, 6 or 8 jobs, and I'd have 6 or 8 jobs, and lots of people, nearly everybody had 2 or 3 jobs,
And some was over as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it was by function. And then it was kind of cool too, because as the business was scaling, you could start to say, oh, okay, now we want to hire somebody that we can stick into this box, because we've got, this guy's got 5 jobs. We want to take him down to 4, and we're going to have this person, pick up 1 from this guy and 1 from that guy. And the functional org chart is the part I want to underline.
So you've used the word functional org chart for people that are listening and the playback and stuff. Let's walk through how, effectively 5 steps quickly to put an org chart together, and how do you optimize through the process of growth?
Well, I watched Steve do this yesterday. Yeah. So can I take a run at it and Steve can edit me?
Yeah, I'm open.
So think about your business. Maybe you need to discover products, and then you need to get them into your system, and then you need to sell them, which means you're going to need to buy some more of them, or you're going to fulfill the orders, and then you've got to do the accounting on it. So there's a flow to
Michael, 1 second. Steve shared his screen. Shall I put that on the screen while he's talking, Steve, or is that for your bit?
No, I think it's perfectly fine. This may be instructive for everyone. This is just our take on a functional org chart. Cool. So, Michael, carry on.
Sorry, Michael.
Okay. So there's a flow to your business across these steps. And then within each section, then there's a group of functions that you've got to have. So within marketing, you've got somebody that's doing the digital marketing, you've got somebody that's doing creative, you've got somebody that's doing social, whatever. And so that's where you start to break out those different functions within there. That's, in my opinion, that's the best way to lay it out. We've used this model over and over and over again.
That's really a key takeaway. And maybe Dennis can add some points on this here in a second, but if you write down the names of the people and you try to assign titles to them, you're going to have a big set of problems because those titles have lasting impacts. There's a whole bunch of things, unintended consequences you'll never expect, and every single one of them virtually is negative because you're building a business around people instead of building it around the functional result that you want. And so by having a functional org chart, and these are just suggestions, not every business is like this, but this is largely consistent with the typical e-commerce business. You start with business development. Hey, I'm developing a brand. Am I doing any partnerships, etc.? Maybe you don't have all of those things. Fine. But you only put the names of your team into the boxes that are relevant to you today. And you realize maybe I need this other box in the future, but I have nobody there now. And Michael already said it. Dennis's name was in 5 of those boxes. Michael's name was in 5 of those boxes. My name was in, 1 because I don't like to do any work. But by having a functional view, you take it into what does the business need versus who's going to be here 5 years from now or 10 years from now. That's not how business really works. So it's a really important lesson in my view.
Yeah.
I think one of the other, sorry about that. One of the other aspects that's important about building out that functionality of the org chart is that it also really allows you to get in there and actually create then a job description for positions that you intend to hire, right? And then to create a career plan for those positions as well. And those are kind of, next level types of activities once you're in that 50 to 100 zone. But those are the things that kind of get you into that neighborhood and then really also start to set expectations as you begin the hiring process for those positions.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of optimizing as you go, I'm looking at the screen here for the people who benefit of the podcast. Steve's put up the overview here. He's scanned in his biz dev, merchandising, marketing, sales, operations, business intelligence, information technology, and the finance department. So this is obviously a large scale company. Each of these columns have got maybe 20, 30, or say 20 attributes to each. How do you then elongate back to put names to those? Because Steve, you said it could be, there's repercussions by putting names in first versus functions.
Well,
how do you then assign? Sorry.
The repercussions are if you just start and break down names and then, this person is director of sales, or what have you. That's where things get a little nutty. So I think there's an argument I could make that every e-commerce company has all of these functions they ultimately need to do. Maybe they can't do them today. So, for example, maybe you don't need a safety lead in your operations department. You leave that box empty for the time being. But at some point, you're going to need somebody who's in charge of safety. That's just the nature of the beast. And it could be somebody else who's already on the team who takes over that responsibility. But at the end of the day, if you're a one-man show or one-woman show, maybe your name's in all those boxes today. But the strategy then is, what box do I hate the most as an entrepreneur? What box do I despise the most that brings me the least joy and the most misery? I need to hire somebody for that box. Not because that box itself is torture, by the way. In our merchandising department, some of the things that I hate about all the details and analysis and optimization, the endless spreadsheets that they go through. I hate that stuff. And one of our people, Sherry, she is happier than anyone could possibly be with one of those spreadsheets. So finding the right person for the right function is a key part of this role. So fill in the blanks, or you start with your name in every box that you absolutely have to have. And then you start filling in other people based on what you hate to do. That's my strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Going to say some more hellos. Hello to Claire. Mia's here. Sahal's back. David Cookton's here. Paul Miller says hello. Dave's here. Kirsten's here. Stuart's here. Ebru's here. Evelyn's back. Hope you're well. Marcel. Ben Valence is back on the call. Andrew Kramer. Welcome back. Bill McDowell. Stuart's here as well. Ahmad's here. Preeta's here. Jason Chew. Selva's back on the call as well. Facebook user says here, very interesting. Sorry, sometimes they come up the feed. The E-Myth book explains this quite well. Paul Miller said, hey guys. Paul Harvey, as we all know, is Dennis, Steve, and Michael in big caps as well. Going back to earlier on, we live the business, employees clock on and off. Talking about earlier on, Steve, when you were working till midnight and people were going on and turning on off the air conditioning. Jason says, I'm grateful to apply some of the learnings from this call. Thank you, guys. And Selva says, hello from Singapore. And hi, everyone. It's Friday and it's hot. Don't we know it? I need
all right.
Aircon in here. So,
I'm thankful for Owen to get us a weather update. That definitely helped me.
So going back to here, so we've gone quite in depth with the org chart. Let's zoom back out again. Where do we go next after this? We kind of covered the org chart. Let's get a bit more into the finances and the scale and stuff. What were you doing next?
So before we talk kind of finance and so on, I want to just remind people, first of all, the comments are very helpful. I love to see those. One of the comments about the E-Myth, if you go to awesomers.com/8, I do a book review about the E-Myth and why I think it's really a really essential book for people to get to know. I'm a big believer in the philosophy. There's some stuff in it.
It's outdated now, though, isn't it? Quite a chunk of it, but it's still.
The philosophies of, I'm running a pie shop are not necessarily relevant, but the franchise prototype of I want to run a business that produces a predictable result every time is, in fact, very good. Some people prefer Work the System by Sam Carpenter, which is also a fine book. But it's that systems mentality. And if you really want to build a business that can run either without you or at least without relying on you for every answer, that is a big, important book. Another one that I would recommend is awesomers.com/13, which is The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. So once again, this is like full confession time. I need like extra spotlights and go into the Big Brother house confession time. I'm a terrible manager. I'm not going to be a good manager, probably ever, but I can get better. I can build my skills. And the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey is one of the easiest books. It takes you less than an hour to read. The lessons are crystal clear, and it can become a vocabulary in your company. I'm sure Michael and Dennis have said, who's got the monkey about 1,000 times. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Well, we had a Beanie Baby monkey. You remember sitting in meetings? And, we would go into a meeting and discuss something. And as we would go to leave the meeting, though, the whole point of the book is to say, well, who's actually got the monkey? Who's going to take the action step? And we would grab the Beanie Baby monkey and throw it at them and say, here, So they would walk back to their desk with this reminder that they've got to solve the next step and move us all forward.
Cool. Where do you want to take it now, Steve? What's the next step?
Well, once you kind of have a sense of what your functions look like and you are trying to develop your skills as a manager, now you got to figure out how is the cash working. And this is, again, where the systems come in. So you can't just hire people and hope that somebody pays them. You have to pay them, right? So you have to understand your cash flow, which is far more important than a P&L. P&L shows you profit and loss, and there's a bunch of accounting. Well, I'll just call it tomfoolery, but the accountants call it laws. There's a bunch of rules about how things show up on a P&L that are not necessarily instructive for somebody trying to figure out how much money, how much cash I have in the bank to make payroll. Yeah. And so understanding cash flow statements, I would say, is one of the most important things you can do next to then figure out, am I able to make hires? Am I able to lean into advertising so I can scale? And that's something that, I feel, again, that typical Amazon sellers and often entrepreneurs, that's something we don't like to do. We don't want to do it. And so we just kind of delay it and procrastinate it in whatever way we can.
Yeah. Do you also find, depends on how good you are with cash flow and understand how you can optimize your cash flow? Like some people will kind of sail close to the wind. Like we're in a pandemic. This is probably the worst time if you were very aggressive on your cash flow because you were constantly leveraging. Now you don't know how much cash you need on hand because you don't know, you can't predict the future. What are some of the lessons that you've learned and what you would advise people listening now? Like you said, entrepreneurs are focused on building things and stuff. Cash flow is super important, but I have seen it with people that, because they're clever with math, they then abuse that and think, oh, don't worry, we can tickle it along. And then as soon as something like, not that it has, but a pandemic of some kind comes along, it wipes them to shore. What would be your advice here?
Well, first, it's, who among us can predict anything and everything, right? You can't be prepared for everything. So let's remember that we're human. But I can tell you that when the line is going up, that's all entrepreneurs see forever.
Yeah.
Right. We only see that one line and we're like, how could it come down? And man, oh man, if it goes down even for a day, I don't know if anybody clicks refresh 1,000 times a day like we have, but the minute sales are off, everybody's just walking around, moping around. Oh, well, what's happening? This is a nightmare. Sales are down 2%, whatever. So we have to remind ourselves that there is a top to pretty much everything. It doesn't mean there's not exceptions, but plan for what that top looks like and at least prepare for what if there is a setback seasonality wise or otherwise. And without anticipating, if you always just think you're going straight up, then you don't have any sort of reserve. And I would tell people right now, there is more risk in the world today than there was 10 weeks ago. Yeah. And so we have to par back some of that aggressive, risky behavior that comes naturally to most entrepreneurs.
Yeah. We covered this in your in depth, so I'm not sharing anything that's secret. Do you want to tell the story about I think it was with AdWords where you went crazy on scaling?
Yeah, Michael and Dennis were both there. So we're like, hey, everybody, we're spending $100,000 on Google in a month and we're getting $1 million of revenue. This is a 10% ad spend ratio. This is acceptable to us. We know our margin. We know our contribution of profit. And basically, if we can double our money every month, 100,000 goes in, 200,000 of contribution margin comes out. Let's do more of that. So we go to 200,000 in a month. We get 2 million in sales. You guys remember this? Yeah. Then we're like 300,000 gets us 3 million in sales. 400,000 in a spending in a single month gets us 4 million in sales in a single month. By the way, not 2 years earlier, we wondered if we could get to 1 million a month in sales. Just so you know, it's not like we just sat down and go, hey, should we do 1 million or 4 million, gentlemen? And then we toast our champagne and caviar. That's not how it was. We are scrappy. We don't know anything, right? We're learning. So anyway, so then we're at 400,000 and I'm like, hey, let's just skip to the end, right? This is where my idiotic behavior comes in and why everyone needs to check their own behaviors as well. I say, let's just skip to the end, and we spent $750,000 in the month. I think this is right, and we got $4.5 million worth of sales, roughly. So that curve that I never saw ending tipped over completely. Now, by the way, so it means we more or less overspent by about $250,000 in a single month. Yeah, and that everybody's looking like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? And
were you taken off the org chart there and under managing PPC?
Well, to be clear, I was not capable or responsible for PPC specifically. We had a team. I'm joking. And by the way, Brian Simonson, one of the other brothers, was managing that. And I will tell you some stories about him. Maybe we'll get him on another episode. But ultimately, we scaled back for 2 months, maybe it's a month, I don't remember, and just went down to 400,000 to spend. 4 million plus or minus in sales. And then we're like, all right, we think we figured out what happened. We had all these pay-per-click agencies, all these black boxes that were telling us all this data. And so we said, okay, well, let's do it again. And so we spent $750,000 again, and we got about $4.5 million in sales. So in the course of 90 days, I wasted $500,000 trying to prove that I was smarter than the internet. I am not, as it turns out. I have $500,000 reasons why, but that was a very clear lesson. And it's not like we just were rolling in money. This was not easy for us, but we also were taking chances. And so those lessons I talked about with the line and the bell curve, they apply to everybody at all times, and me especially.
Yeah. So because obviously I'm jumping around the process a bit, where did that come into the history? You know, we've gone from hitting between 50, 100 employees. We discussed the org charts. What year? If we put a bit of a timeline to it, it might be a bit easier for the audience to follow. Where were you at that point? So we just worked on the story there that you went at it twice to spend 750 grand. And what year was that? And what was the overall yearly revenue around that time?
Yeah, so that was probably around year 4, or maybe 5. So year 1, we did, maybe $1 million. Year 2, maybe $1 million. Year 3, we kicked it up to maybe $3 million or something. But then, like September 11th happened right around there.
Right.
It was not ideal for us, obviously. Yep. And then we struggled to break out of that. Maybe we were even at 5 million or something. But I remember Michael and I, we were sitting in front of investment bankers. And the question was, we're doing 5 million a year. What do we have to do to be important to the market? Do you remember what they said, Michael?
Not specifically.
Their answer was, if you're not doing 25 million, who cares? And we're like, quintuple the number we're doing now. We have no idea how to do that. So we went back to the team and we said, how do we grow from where we are, right? Because we were kind of stuck. We were at the 1 and then maybe the 5, 3 to 5, whatever. And the team got around, and ultimately we said, well, we're going to have to advertise. We're going to have to do it aggressively, and we're going to have to do it smartly. And we went from whatever it was, that 5-6 range. And these numbers I'm pulling from memory. They're correct, just not accurate.
Yeah.
But we jumped from about that 5-6 million to 18 million the next year, and then 36 million, and then 60 plus or 55 plus. And all of that came on the back of systems being built.
Yeah.
Org chart in place, systems, functions, process, people ready. Now let's put gas in the fuel tank at the top.
Yeah. And the thing is, that it came from a conversation, because your mindset was back there that you're on a lower figure and you've gone in, was it to raise money? And they're like, well, what are you doing? It's like, don't come back until, and then you sat there and had to figure it out. So by having that conversation where they almost sent you out with your tail between your legs, as if to say, who are you coming in here asking questions like that, young boy? You need to step up your game. You then, just from that conversation, you went away and figured it out. If you didn't have that conversation, maybe you wouldn't be figuring that part out. But it was because you got pushed back, and so it made you think about it. So what happened there in terms of when you went back to the team? What were you thinking about when you're doing that?
Well, first of all, the truth was we didn't know how to do it, right? We just simply didn't know. And we also were self-imposing limitations on ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We didn't know it at the time. We had no, idea that we're needing to go break our own paradigm of thought, right? That's ultimately, looking back, what happened. But they challenged us and they said, if you want to be relevant to the world and you're not doing 25 million, don't come back here. We don't want to talk to you. Yeah. And tail between the legs was an understatement, believe me. So we had to then ask the team, is this possible, right? How do we do it? And the people, and this is the point, system or strategy begins where you're going to fire the rocket, right? Systems give you the capabilities to build that rocket and make sure the rocket's flying the right direction. That's all the KPIs. That's all the core infrastructure. But people, that's how you scale.
Yeah,
I didn't know how to do it. Michael, he knew pieces of it, but the team ultimately said, well, what if we try this? What if we try that? And then they went and they did stuff, and then we measured it and had all the things in place. That was the lesson. And so our paradigm of thinking had to be shattered for us to go through to the next level.
Well, you jumped from 5 to 36 in 3 years. So that's a heck of a jump, isn't it? So in terms of how were you, was that in the same period? Just because obviously going back to the PPC, Was that part of the growth, or was there other mechanisms that create the growth? Like, what triggered that jump from 5 to 36? Is it the PPC on its own, the mistakes along the way, or did you find other ways to scale outside of running the AdWords?
Well, it has to start with, some kind of stimuli, and for sure, advertising, pouring that gas at the top of the funnel in and getting profitable business out. That is something we believe in.
Yeah.
Each of those, when the team, like Dennis set up all of these people, sales, fulfillment, and had a massive crew, if they deliver a positive experience, it turns out you're going to get some referrals, right? So there's this flywheel effect. And then the more of that you do, the more people see your name, the more activity you get. The business has a natural tendency to spread if you do it well. And those are the types of things. We did some other things probably, but nothing was more instrumental than leaning into, ad spend. And by the way, this applies to whether it's Google or Amazon ads, any of it is just pouring money in the top of a funnel.
Were you doing TV back then, or any stuff like broadcast-based stuff, or is it purely digital measurable marketing on the internet?
We tried a couple silly things that were completely pointless. The thing that worked the best was all digital stuff. Now, we had a big affiliate program, and by the way, that can be very, very effective for all those people who have their own websites. An affiliate program properly run can be a nice add-on to your business. There are other channels, the whole remarketing and retargeting side of the thing. There are various parts of marketing. I can show you the marketing wheel that has all these different segments. And if you're just in one channel with one technique of driving sales, like just on Amazon, just using Amazon sponsored products, fine, that's a great business and you can build some equity there. But if you want to grow, you're going to have to do more than that, most likely.
Yeah. And would it, because you were a products-based business as well, wasn't it? It wasn't a service-based, which
Correct.
allows you to
All
grow.
product.
So in that time, is there any correlation with the amount of new products you stacked to get there as well? Or is it just you just found more paths to revenue?
This is actually where we went from drop shipping to private label. So back during that time, we figured out that these popular items, right? So just think about this as it applies to kind of searching for a product on Amazon. These popular items, they happen to be popular on our own site at the time. But what if we just R&D those things, right? And R&D, again, I've shared this, I think, on this podcast, but a lot of people get confused, think that means research and development, but we think it's rip off and duplicate. And then we throw a little I on the end and call it innovate too, right? Yeah. So RDI, and we would take and we made our own products. And this is when in, 18 plus years ago, we started buying stuff out of China and Europe and other places so that our margin went up by double. So we went from 20% margins drop shipping to 40% margins. And that was a huge amount of cash to be able to sprinkle around, to hire people, to do more advertising, et cetera. So margin optimization and margin expansion was one of the key factors that combined then with bringing on more products that were profitable as well.
Cool. Right. I'm curious because we've come up to 48 minutes here. We're now at 36 million. Let's start to fill in the gaps to the final 14. Where do you want to take this?
Yeah. So I think really maybe Michael or Dennis has some comments on this, but to us, we didn't do anything different when we went from that, kind of 5-6 range to 18 to 36. It was just kind of, we're just staying the course and we're just following the money. We did run some promotions like, when we started, can we do $1 million in a month? And then we're like, can we do $1 million in a year? And then we said, can we do $1 million a month? We ran a promotion, said, can we do $1 million in a day? Dennis, do you remember that?
I do. It was pretty spectacular. We had some healthy skepticism surrounding some of those events. But the closer it got to the day and the more we talked about it and planned for it, it wasn't just another harebrained scheme, right? Instead, it turned out to be something that was well planned, and we had the idea of what we wanted to accomplish and how we were going to drive that interest. I think even for a little while we had suspended our other sales for like a week or so in terms of like offsite, sale ideas or discounts essentially, and really ramped up that process. And then I think one of the other critical parts that sometimes gets forgotten is we also incentivized our fulfillment teams and our warehouses to actually deliver a positive experience when all of those orders came rushing in. So we hit this $1 million day, and we actually had incentives in place for our guys to get those orders out, and to our fulfillment teams to prevent cancellations on orders. And so I think, to Steve's point, it was less about like how do we metamorphosize as a company, but more like understanding the infrastructure we have and how do we juice it and oil it to really deliver the most efficient results. And I think, at least in my opinion, a lot of those late term gains we got were really from getting more out of our people and getting more out of our systems.
That's true in my view.
So that's pretty impressive to get to $1 million. So was that just the one-off day that you landed that, or did you do it a couple of times to get beyond it?
Well, I will tell you the short version of the story is we had been every week we would do promotions and try to really juice. What we found is when we did a month-end promotion, sales would spike at the end of the month. And we're like, we kind of like that. I wonder if we could do it twice a month. And so we did it, and it worked. And we're like, all right, we kind of like that. I wonder if we could do it every week. And we did it, and it kind of worked. And so then we were doing $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 at various times on these promotion end dates on these weeks, but we never were quite at that $1 million. And so at the beginning of one year, I said, hey, this is the year we're doing $1 million in one single day. Go make it happen. See you later. I'm going back to the beach, whatever. And about September of that year, we had not hit the $1 million. It was just kind of steady as she goes. We were growing, and it wasn't happening. And there was a fair amount of skepticism. So I proclaimed one day, I said, all right, listen, here's the day. It's happening in this day in November. So let it be written, so let it be done. And still nothing was happening. Still there's a lot of skepticism. And so then I got all the managers, all the senior team, and I said, write on the whiteboard how much you think we're going to do on that day. And boy, talk about true confessions. I think there may have been one or two people that wrote $1 million on that board, that they were basically marketing and sales. And they were not $1,001,000. They were like 1 million even. And everybody else was below. And so I'm like, this is terrible leadership, just so you know the lesson. I didn't do my job. None of them believed we could do it. And so
you fired them all? And
I fired every single one of them. I stakes with heads on them, pikes on a stick. It was amazing. And that really motivated everyone. No, I said, all right, I don't know what to do. You guys figure it out. Oh, by the way, I'll be on vacation during that week, literally on a beach in Mexico. My family's already planned. I can't get out of it. Good luck. And sure enough, everybody did what they needed to do. They figured it out. As before, I didn't have the answers, but they did. And by the end of that day, we did $1.8 million, and nothing broke. Nothing broke in the system. Nobody felt overworked. It was a busy day. It was exciting. Everybody was happy, but nothing in the system broke. And if we flash forward to when the business first began, we did our first promotion. We literally, Dennis, you remember Valentine's Day when we had to take off we melted down over the course of about 40 grand in 30 days, killed us some years earlier when we began.
And some of our vendors actually called to say, hey, if you're going to do that again, let us know.
Yeah, we melted down. And then years later, it's smooth sailing. And so, yes, we were able to achieve actually a larger day later on and so on. But that was a promotional thing that we did. But mostly steady as she goes is the right way.
Yeah. Okay. So question, because I want to get around for you to advise people listening to the call and the playback on the podcast. What was the toughest decision from that 0 to 50 million that you ever had to make?
I'll let these guys answer first. Put them on the spot.
Yeah.
Scaling back after 9/11,
Right.
it became clear that we were going to have to resize the business, and the numbers were just not going to pencil out. So we had to build a plan there. And what I wanted to do was build a plan that we could stick with. And I don't know if I'm good or lucky, but probably lucky. but we put together a plan, and it hurt like hell, and it worked.
And that you had to skinny down the team, refresh your cash flow and forecasting and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I didn't want to take small bites. Got
to cut deep and fast.
Yeah, and just
Horrible.
do it, and boom. That was the hardest day.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's the slow clap of death, isn't it? If you do it over long, people get like, "Who am I? Am I going to walk the plank next?" So it's best to go deep straight away. Yep. Take care of them, be kind, and then it's tough. What about you, Dennis?
Advice, let me just add, because this is important. One of the best pieces of advice I got was, as a manager, you've got to do this thing, but you have to focus on what you're actually doing. You're saving the business. You're saving the jobs of the people that are still going to be there. So it's easy to, and it's correct to feel bad about the jobs that are going away, but it's important to also focus on that you're saving the business and those things, so that then you can go back and get some of those people back or whatever, right? But if everybody dies, that's not good.
Yeah, no, exactly. Dennis, what was yours?
For me, it's kind of a similar conversation, but it was really understanding. Your intelligence understands certain things, and there's an emotional component as well. But the toughest decisions for me were actually identifying the bad actors and then taking very specific actions around that. I actually had to come up with plans to, like, okay, this person is not just a non-producer. They are an active voice against the system and against the success of the company, and then learning how to deal with that. Because those are individual people. Each one of them have individual thoughts, feelings, and ideas about how to accomplish stuff. And so coming up with plan, to address those things, try and turn them around, and ultimately, if not possible, exit them from the system as quickly as possible. And that was the hardest lesson, because that's not, when you're hiring people, that's not the outcome you were looking for. But you better be ready to acknowledge your mistakes and be prepared to move on with them for the sake of your team.
Yeah, I suppose, Steve, your hardest decision was to watch Michael and Dennis take care of that, or no, I'm joking. No, your hardest decision yourself. Yeah.
Well, it really is the combination of those. When we have big challenges, we got to act fast and decisively and painfully, right? Yeah. And these are inevitable for every business. Every company, Google, Facebook, all of these unicorns you think had no problems. There are problems like you cannot imagine along the way that were life and death. It's like, if we do it, great. If we don't do it, we're out. And we had those too. And so being decisive and being realistic about the future. But I guarantee you the hire slow, fire fast is really important. Not to hurt people, but actually to let them get on their way. Let them go be productive somewhere else. Let them live their life. Don't steal their life from them. And secondly, you've got to preserve and protect the nucleus of what is left. And those hard decisions where we're emotionally racked into it, we tend to procrastinate them. We tend to put them off. And that's the worst thing for every person up and down the line. And it creates a very negative cultural effect as well.
Cool. Well, on that note, I think we're coming up to the hour now. Any passing advice from each of you, what you've learned apart from what we just discussed there, the positives as well, what's one thing from each of you that the audience can take away today of scaling the business? Starting with you, Michael. Yeah.
Focus on your strengths. Figure out who's good at stuff and let them run. And figure out what you're bad at and find a way to get some sort of a compliment.
Just don't do it. Yeah. Dennis.
For me, it's measuring success and then going back and duplicating those efforts. Too many times you can sit in a meeting and you can come away with a lot of things that you're doing. And then you go back and you talk about that meeting 30 days later and you say to yourself, well, we did this thing, but what did it do? So go into every decision you make with a plan for success and then go back after and measure it. Were we successful? Did this do what we wanted it to do?
Yeah. Makes sense. Steve?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's just one of those things where you say, when you set out, you've got to know your strategy, right? And I go strategy, system, scale, right? So know where you're going and don't be afraid to pivot, right? Right now, there's a lot of pivoting happening. We have some companies that are in terrible condition due to this pandemic. And some of those we've pivoted into PPP or PPE, right?
Yeah.
Not intentionally at first. It was just kind of a byproduct. But we had to pivot. We have to survive. And so strategy is fine, but don't be afraid to modify. Systems, this is SOPs, this is financials, this is everything that we do runs in systems. And we, parsimony.com is the basis of all of our systems. And then scale, that's people. Hire slow, fire fast, be kind, be generous, be realistic, set clear expectations, be a true manager, by the way. You can't be an entrepreneur and just half-ass this thing. You really have to do it right.
Yeah, no, agree. Okay, if people want to reach out to you guys, starting with Steve, what's the best way to reach you?
Steve Simonson, I am on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can go to the awesomers.com podcast. This should be episode number 183, so awesomers.com/183. But I'm online, and I love entrepreneurs, and I help when I can.
Great. Michael?
Michael at Parsimony, PARSIMONY.com.
Excellent. And for you, Dennis?
Dennis at HC Gamer Life. That would be hardcore, would be the initials.
Excellent. Cool. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow we've got Women of Amazon tomorrow, part 6. And then on Sunday will be Mindset Sunday. Steve and I will be back here next Friday. We'll come up with a topic between now and then for our joint cast. I hope everyone enjoys. I know everyone's got that Friday feeling, and the feeling is to stay home again. So stay home, stay safe. Hope you're all well. Much love. Take care. I'll be back here 4 p.m. tomorrow. Again, thank you for everyone listening and where we've syndicated across all the groups. Thank you and enjoy your day. Take care.
Thanks, Danny.
Bye, everybody.